Legalizefreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Beyond politics, poverty and war. Legalizefreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Joseph Chilton Pearce, who joins us to discuss some of the ideas in his book, Exploring the Crack in the Cosmic Egg. Originally published in 1974, the book has just been reissued. Although most human beings consider themselves sane, as a species we exhibit almost total insanity. From endless wars to the wholesale destruction of the environment, our actions wreak havoc on all around us, and in the end, on ourselves. But what is the cause of our mass psychosis, and why do so few of us acknowledge it? Do greed and violence truly reflect human nature, or are we victims of some long-forgotten tragedy that lives on within the dark depths of our collective unconscious? Exploring the Crack in the Cosmic Egg asserts that our fear of death, and belief that the universe is fundamentally hostile, is at the root of all our problems. Beginning in childhood, the development of language and the process of acculturation render our direct experiences of the world much less vivid, and our innate states of non-ordinary consciousness become suppressed. Trapped in a specific cultural context, a so-called cosmic egg, we are no longer able to have or even recognise mystical experiences not mediated by the limitations of our culture, which itself literally splits our minds and prevents us from living fully in the present. Exploring the Crack in the Cosmic Egg explores the varieties of non-ordinary states that can help us return to the unencumbered consciousness of our infancy. Just as we each create our own cosmic egg of reality through cultural conditioning, we also innately create a crack in that egg, through which we can restore wholeness to our minds, find freedom from our fear of death, and re-establish our ability to create our own realities through imagination and biological transcendence. Hello and welcome, Joe, and thank you so much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, today, Joe, we're going to talk about it's 40 years since you wrote Exploring the Crack in the Cosmic Egg, and a new edition of the book has just come out, so we're going to discuss some of the ideas in that. But perhaps before we do that, maybe you could tell listeners just a little bit about your background and what it was that happened in your life that brought you to writing and to be on this path.
Well, great guns. Where should we start? The cradle? No, I've had certain things that have really bothered me for a long time. When I was a little boy and turning about 7, and was told that, and I was sent to my first grade of school with my first grade teacher, and I came home and I announced that I would never go back. And my older brothers had a great laugh over this, and they said, "Why, you'll have to go back to school or they'll put you in jail." And I got quite upset over that as a 7-year-old. And I said, "But I own myself, and they can't do this to me." So that started me off on the problem of being what I finally called an imposter. I found that I had to pretend to be something I was not really, or in effect they would put me in jail, to use that as a figure of speech. And so my whole childhood, in fact, was spent in this concern over holding on somehow or other to my integrity, while at the same time trying to take care of the mad demands of the world around me. That was quite, by and large, the case from the beginning on. All my books have been written more or less about that. My argument with the ordinary run of things in most of the world. I could start in and list all the things that have happened, but I think I put those in my books more or less.
Okay, well, what's the basic premise behind the book? And perhaps you can say something also about the concept of the cosmic egg, what you mean by that.
Well, the cosmic egg is simply the sum total of what we're living in, the man-made world of thought that we've built around ourselves. That is our culture, and all the trouble it causes. I've really been all my life puzzled by how could it be so absolutely ethereal or beautiful and so on, a world out there, and yet we turn right around and here's this horrible thing called our culture doing terrible things. And the contrast of these two has been simply, I've been aware of it all my life, and I'm still very much aware of it. All I can do is, I say, I've become an imposter, so they don't put me in jail or stone me or anything like that. But by and large, I know my own life that I lived myself is quite different from, apparently, from that which I find at least a great deal of the rest of the world going by, starting with politics and just keep right on through all the wars and horrors in a world that's really very beautiful and very awesome. Just those two, the contrast has really occupied me. So the cosmic egg is this artificial thing that we've spun out in mankind, and the crack in it is any chance you get to escape that and find what the real world is beyond that.
In terms of the human condition, I think a lot of people, such as yourself, have looked, from an early age, have looked at the world around them and seen that there's something seriously wrong with humankind. And yet, most people, generalizing here, but the mainstream view is that the aberrations, such as war and corruption and the other problems, are somehow atypical, and that we're on the road to getting those sorted out. But of course, the opposite seems to be true.
Well, I've taken, I think in all my books, that every attempt we make to correct that crazy world of war and all out there simply spins it ever faster. No matter how we try to correct a profoundly incorrect notion, that notion cancels out any correction of it. For instance, if you take taxation, you pay your taxes or else. So most of the world is made up of, this world of culture is made up of do this or else. And were it not for that or else, the culture wouldn't survive. And so it's all I've ever said that there's a magnificent world here, but it's not the one practiced, and all by our living culture. It's just that. And the only way to get away from it is, as a child, for instance, I just retreated inside my own world and played happily and played hooky from school. They couldn't keep me in school. I never have. I found a way that I could be myself and yet at the same time pass myself off as one of those crazies out there. And so I felt by the time I was 8 or 9 or so that I was an imposter, that I had to pretend to be something which I certainly was not, but if I didn't pretend it, I'd be in real trouble. So to avoid that kind of trouble, I learned to be an imposter. On one hand, I'm agreeing with the Army and the Air Corps, and I was in the Air Corps in World War II, the Army Air Corps. And on one hand, I have to agree with that, and on the other hand, somehow or other, I have to hold on to my own integrity within myself. So that's been the just simply what I've called by the the crack in the egg is everyone assumes that this cultural egg we have built up with all of its wars and its horrors and its famines and its starving children and so on and so forth. That's an artificial, unreal world, and you can drop out of that into your own real world if you learn, I would say, how to be an imposter. With one hand, apparently play the game of culture, but on the other, maintain your own internal freedom, and to a remarkable extent, your physical freedom.
It's interesting when you speak about culture, because for many people, they think of culture, they only think of the arts, literature, what have you. They don't think of it as the broader scheme under which we live. And it's interesting our attitudes to it as well, because we talk about someone perhaps a bit boorish or a bit uncouth. We refer to them sometimes as uncultured, and culture really is seen as a good thing, and it's good to be cultured, it's good to be part of what's happening, whatever the zeitgeist is.
Well, certainly the word culture covers a lot of different territory, has a lot of different meanings. If we're around a person who will say they're a very cultured person, we mean they're educated, their behavior is not boorish, and so on and so forth. That's one. But on the other hand, culture is an artificial world you build up, separate and distinct from the real world, in order to do certain things. I use the term, for instance, you make a culture of a person's blood or something like that, looking for a certain disease. So you can use culture in all sorts of different ways. But the way I'm using culture in most of my books is a very negative thing. And I find that most people believe in their culture without ever giving it a second thought. And my only problem was that I didn't believe in it at all. And so I finally, and I had all sorts of experiences. From my late teens, I discovered unconflicted behavior, which is, if I could eliminate all conflict within myself, I could do impossible things. And I did, with lots of witnesses. I found out that fire didn't have to burn me, that gravity didn't have to hold me, that none of the ordinary things that make up an ordinary world are binding if you eliminate all conflict within yourself. In fact, this is beginning to really be understood. I think of the new issue in childbirth is that if the woman fixing to, instead of going into what we used to call labor and all, this is the work of that great French physician who was at Medicalization and then went to London and built the big research center. He's been turning out some remarkable works here lately, and having to do with this very thing, eliminating all conflict within oneself. You can do things you can't do otherwise. We have absolute dominion over our life and our world if we are without internal conflict, where we don't agree on the exterior, I'll do that, but on the interior, we're terribly worried because we know it's not the case. Now, that's an internal conflict. When you get rid of the internal conflict and discover unconflicted behavior, there are almost, I know of no ordinary things in the world that can bother you, and I've had them happen to me time and time again. One of my colleagues, I was teaching at some college, and one of my colleagues, I was telling them they all seemed to be constantly afraid and live lives of hidden fear, putting up a front of everything all right, but underneath they've got all these phobias and fears and worries. And I was trying to explain to him, if you can get rid of all those conflicts, none of this stuff bothers you. You can do anything at all. The human, in an unconflicted state has absolutely dominion over the world out there. And I had gone on to do a thorough study of firewalking, for instance, on the island of Ceylon, I think they called it back then, where they have, 100 people walking in these great firewalks, which they do in honor of their god Gama. And you'll have 100 people at a time going down through. They prepare it for 3 weeks, and then they get up and they all, as a group, will go down into a pit of fire 20 feet long, 6 feet wide, and deep, a deep pit, and will melt aluminum on contact. And you have 100 people that go down and through that and out the other side in a state of great ecstasy. Now, this we know. I mean, there's no question about this if this goes on. So there are two activities going on here. One is if they're unconflicted, they don't have one part of their psyche saying, let's do that, and the other saying, oh, we better not, we'll be in trouble. That's the big hitch. But if you get rid of all conflict, there are no barriers to what the human can do, because he has dominion over the world. And that's too often interpreted in a religious sense. I mean in a very ontological sense, just the way this thing that our reality is rigged up. If we can get rid of our conflicts, we can do anything that we take a notion.
The vast majority of us are living with this intense internal conflict. Some people are aware of it, or some people are more aware than others, I should say. I think everyone's aware at some level, and it causes tremendous problems psychologically, even physically, within the person, and also, of course, outside in the world. Now, where did this come from? Where did this originate? We can see how culture perpetuates it, and it's been going on for as long as we know. But how on earth did this state of affairs come to be?
Well, I think there have been periods in history, as our more recent episodes of study uncovering some of these great cultures from 20,000 years ago. We had cultures that were doing incredible things. The great culture at Baalbek in southern Syria, or Lebanon, where they were moving these incredibly huge stones. British engineers said it would take 40,000 very, very strong adult males to move one of them, and they were moving them 5 miles with no road in between or anything else. Now, these cultures we've begun to discover that these incredible cultures lived long before us. As I said, 20,000 years, pretty long time. And so we also have, right this day, things going on that show that we can escape that terrible network of belief that has kept us crippled, and individually we can discover an awful lot of freedom. Then the second thing we observe is you better keep quiet about it, because you get in trouble if you talk about it too much. I'll never forget, in fact, what brought me to finally write my book, Cracked. I was in this talking with this bunch in my college group where I was teaching, and finally I was trying to explain to them that they had so much more freedom than they had ever dreamed of, that all the various aspects of it. I'm starting to tell them some of my experiences and so on. And finally I had one of them one day come up, put his arm around my shoulder, very fatherly, an elderly guy, and he said, "Joe, I hate to tell you this, but we in this department think you're hopelessly mad." Well, I loved it. I thought, okay, I'm going to do something about it. So I sat down and I wrote this book, The Crack in the Cosmic Egg, for one purpose, to prove that I was not hopelessly mad. I don't think it did a bit of good, but it certainly did give some indication of the slant of my mind. At that point, I was kind of protesting because I wanted to say to my fellow teachers there, I'm okay, but you're bottled up inside this straitjacket, and I just want to tell you about other ways that you can be. But boy, you find you get ostracized mighty quick because it's going to bring to the surface a person's fear, and they cover that by conflict internally, just like discovering that. And these are the newest things to come out of my friend over in the University of London, who's found that with proper understanding, women, instead of when they start to have a child, instead of having labor pains, they have orgasms, and which are extremely beneficial to the body and incredibly joyful experiences. And they give birth with no pain whatsoever, and you have an entirely different history of mother-child relationships when this takes place. Why? Simply getting rid of the internal conflict. And unconflicted behavior, you're then in charge of your world. That's the whole thing. That's what makes the human so incredible and why he survived all this time in spite of all the crazy things he does. Look at World War, what was it, the last century. In our wars, we killed over 100 million people. By what? Literally deliberate murdering of 100 million people in all, counting them all together, including all those that the Nazis put in the gas chambers, all the rest of it, and then our great wars, and our wars to end all wars, and our bombs, and so on and so forth. And I think people today forget, for instance, what an incredible output of energy World War II was. Because I say I was in the Army Air Corps at that point. I didn't get sent overseas, thank God. But at that point, when that war ended, we had 100,000 pilots in training. I was one of them, in training. We had 100,000 planes with pilots involved in the actual war itself. Unbelievable. The huge output of energy that took place during during that century, and the overall incredible carnage in life, the loss of life, and the suffering, and the pain, and the anguish, and so on that took place. And all that by internal conflicts. You couldn't do that if they were not in conflict with themselves, and somebody comes along and plays on that conflict and literally enslaves them. This is what's really been behind all my books. When I finally turned out that book Cracked in protest of my teaching colleagues who thought I was crazy. I thought, well, I'll have to explain the whole thing to prove that I'm not crazy. And I finally got and they published my book, and then that book didn't set the world on fire, but it at least proved my point. Those who read it kind of caught on. Castaneda had just showed up along about that period with his figure Don Juan, and of course that was later on disproved, and part of it should not have been disproved. But all that was going on at that time, and I wanted to try to publish an argument of my own that proved that we human beings have dominion over this world if we can achieve it over our own life, and we can achieve it over our own life by getting rid of our conflict, which we can only do by getting rid of our fear. I found one book led to another, and the second book, the one you're talking about, Exploring the Crack in the Cosmic Bag, I turned out that book. But that's been the general history of publishing, and I've been glad to get them out, because a lot of people have paid attention to this fact that their own conflicts within themselves are causing them trouble, and the conflicts are always brought about by fear. And always fear of our culture. They'll put you in jail if you don't do this, that, and the other. And particularly when you get to a war, and they start, you even either toe the mark to that, or you're in trouble. Well, I found out I could, by holding this unconflicted type behavior, I could go through with all their emotions, but not be touched by it. And I know this will sound like so much hokum, but I knew darn good and well when I got in that Air Corps and did that flight training and all of that, I knew I could never be touched. I had no fear in that at all. I approached the whole thing as simply as like an imposter. I would pretend to be one of them. But the truth of the matter is I knew what the real fact about the human being is. The conflict between the intelligence of the heart and the intellect of the mind, that's been a favorite subject of mine for a long time. And if you discover the intelligence of the heart and just let go of the intellect of the mind, you'll find your intellect works much better. And your fear of just about everything just drops away. So I think I've ground that one out in the last 3 or 4 books of mine, and having to do with the conflict between heart and mind. And this is something I really hadn't known until I think it was in the 80s. Yeah, it was in the 80s in India. I spent, a whole batch of time in spiritual ashram in India. And it was there that my teacher said there is only one heart. And said the one beating in my chest is the same as the one beating in your chest and everyone else's chest. Said billions of different little egos and brains up here, but only one heart. And this was a profound thing for me. But it explained so many issues. And so my last few books have all, in fact, I think 1990 that Harper published my book on the intellect of the brain and the real knowing of the heart, and the conflict between those two. So, and how we go about removing that conflict, because you get that major conflict of the intellectual activity of the brain and the kind of la-di-da eternal power and wisdom of the heart. And you reconnect them as you're supposed to do, and was for us until we, at some age, we just got split again. So that's an issue of what this book, Exploring the Crack, is.
You spoke earlier about how in some supernatural experiences we can see a glimpse of higher potential. And you also spoke earlier about your own childhood. And of course, childhood is very, very important, because you point out how children up to a certain age, they engage with reality in a sort of authentic way. But that gradually begins to change as culture creeps in, pushed down on children by adults. And then we go through a phase and reach a certain point where we're dealing with culture, not with reality anymore. So, and yet in all we say that we celebrate the innocence of childhood, but as you point out, we just can't wait to stamp it out, to make these children into complete people by actually robbing them of that interaction with reality.
Well, that certainly is true. By age 3, I think a child's pretty well sold out. We try to make some little Einsteins. In fact, they're talking about they actually have little comic books and all of that designed to try to make children highly intellectual. Way out of time, they're not allowed. We're not allowing our children to experience childhood anymore. And that was one of my big complaints in the last couple of books I've been writing is literally killed off childhood in children and given them an artificial world right from the beginning. I pointed out, and this was 3 or 4 years ago, they found that the average 6-month-old infant spent 6 hours a day, no, 3 hours a day, or maybe more, in front of a backlit screen, such as with a television or a computer, or any of these like items that the children were spending more and more time with that artificial electronic world, and less time in their own internal development. And we finally find that their brains themselves, and this is only recently, they're beginning to find that the brains of children with this constant world of electronics around them, the brains are beginning to seriously reflect that change. Why? Our brains have to adjust to the kind of reality that we as adults are forcing on the children. And so we're in pretty much of a pickle on that. You look at the disappearance of play. Children do not play anymore. They look at their little handheld gadgets or a screen, but they don't play. And play proves to be the most critical of all needs of childhood. It's where we really develop the great powers of the mind, are through play. I've been talking about that for a long time and not getting anywhere much with it. So we find play was beginning to be taken over by adults. Years ago, we were just allowed to play when I was a child, and when we got a certain age, we were playing backyard baseball, backyard football, and playing all those things. We found that little by little, all that play was taken over by adults, and they called the shots. So we've not only undergone profound changes ourselves, but then we're hell-bent on making sure those changes take place in our children as early as possible. So these are some of my current arguments that play was one of the greatest necessities of the human child, and we should never lose that capacity for play. And it has been taken over by professionals. We used to have a playground, but they don't have playgrounds anymore. They have supervised playgrounds. Somebody might get sued if anybody were there, and anybody were there changing the children from just their ordinary spontaneous play. So, as you say, I still have a lot of complaints, but I doubt that I can do anything more about it than I've done. But that's essentially what my little book there is, the argument between who we really are and who our culture tries to force on us to be. what our culture really simply tries to make us good taxpayers, supply the army with the appropriate number of boys, and so on and so forth. That is culture in its demonic sense, and I think we're really caught in that now pretty thoroughly. And I think the only way out of it is for an individual to break with that culture and discover the great freedom which there is within them, but they have to be willing to kind of take a chance.
One of the things that concerns me greatly is in our modern reactions to issues in childhood. You talked about the sort of the death of play there, and one thing that I notice the rise of is a lot of medical designations for behavior in children. I mean, the numbers of children in the US, for example, who are on some kind of psychoactive drugs allegedly to moderate their behavior is staggering. And I think that if children are responding to this pressure by trying to sort of reject what's being foisted on them, this may manifest as what some people would call some form of autistic behavior, but actually it's not really such a negative thing. It's in amongst all of that behavior is something positive trying to come through, something more authentic.
Oh well, I think that that what's happened in that respect right from the beginning, a child is under some kind of artificial drug. The mother is in giving birth. And so the child in utero is under various drugs. And by the way, recently they have showed that negative energy, that is the energies produced by the body in the state of fear, worry, or anxiety, profoundly affect an infant in the mother's womb, and will carry right over. So negative emotion proves to be the greatest single enemy we humans have, and I've been amazed at the taking over of so many aspects of a woman's freedom in life on behalf of drugs and so on and so forth is just astonishing. But that's part of culture in its negative state that most of my books have been protested, and saying that we have within us this tremendous capacity. And right now, when we look, we'll suddenly find that the great society there in Ceylon that produced the great firewalking ceremonies over and over, they've all gone. What happened to them? Why, they civilized them. Culture's taken over. The study of the Balinese people, and now whose studies were those? I love those studies. Maybe Margaret Mead's studies of the tremendous freedom they had and the joy of the people. And I've forgotten what island of the Polynesians it was. They had a children's house, and when the child hit puberty around 14 or 15, they all went to the children's house and were just let alone. And they had remarkable sexual activity for 4 years. Margaret Mead points out that for 4 years we know they had intense sexual activity on every hand, but never a pregnancy. And only after they had gone through the cultural ceremonies of marriage, which they do about 18, and then they go to their little goddess in the shrine and they ask her to have a child, they'll immediately be pregnant. Margaret Mead wrote about all this, and nobody believed her. And they said she was just making it all up. No, these were simply societies that simply had control over their life and lived a very full and rich life, and very, very much not the same as our economic, technological culture forces on everybody today. So I think we've created a very a very nightmarish kind of a world with our technology and our science and all of that. And yet, underneath it all, the human should have dominion over this world. If you ever really want to read a good book, read Robert Wolff, and that's with 2 F's on the end, his book, Original Wisdom. He's a French, he was a Dutch, born in Malaysia, and then went back to Holland for all of his education, and then went back to Malaysia with his doctorate and started studying, and he discovered the Signoi people. They were considered just a myth. No one could believe they were real, and Wolff, through a whole series of circumstances, discovered the Signoi, and these were forest people who literally were not visible to any if they didn't want to be. And their life is quite similar in certain respects to the Australian Aborigine. And what we have found with the Aborigine, here was one of the most extraordinary humans that ever lived, and we came along and destroyed them. There were about 500,000 when Captain Cook first came, and today I think there are about 5,000 left. And they've managed to hold on to their original wisdom. And there they would stand on one leg, with bounce with their spear and stare out into space. And we say that they were the most stupid people on Earth. And we find that the reason they just stared and did very little was because the world they were inhabiting was such a beautiful, incredible place. A friend of mine who had spent 9 years with them, and had married the totem, as they call it, become one of them in this particular society or tribe, and spent 9 years with them until her health broke, and she had to go back into our society. And she said that they have the most beautiful, incredible thing, that when you're standing there staring into space, they've moved into the true world for them, which is they call dream time. And it is a lovely, magnificent, incredible world. And they, as I say, there were 500,000 of them originally, and we came along and destroyed them with our. What was the statement of that was made considering one of Captain Cook's visits, and they said, and here came the white man with his Bible and his cannon, his Bible and his cannon.
Now, most people I know, including even my close friends, are generally quite pessimistic about the prognosis for the species. And they talk about, they look out into the world and they see all the chaos and destruction, and they talk about human nature. It's just human nature. And yet, none of these same people that I know want to have wars. They don't want to wreck the environment. They don't want any of these problems, and they don't, by their actions, they never actively promote any of these things. So I think we're labouring under this destructive idea that human nature is what a lot of people say it is, and that we are therefore bound to be destructive both to ourselves and everything around us.
Well, certainly that's been an argument I have made in all of my books, is that this culture we've created is a destructive, demonic, painful, suffering situation for an awful lot of people, and that it's unnatural. That's not who we really are. But we've simply created this artificial culture, and so when I talk about the crack in that, there's a way out, but you can't do it on any large scale. The minute you try to, let's pass a law, then you're done for right there. Can't be done that way. But any individual can start practice this internal getting in touch with their own heart. And I know that sounds like a la-di-da, hearts and flowers, how sweet. But the heart is still the center of all real life and wisdom and everything else. And it's only up in our head and our intellect and our books and nonsense that we do with our intellect that our trouble is caused. So again, I would say we have to get in touch with our heart and learn to open to it and entrust it totally and completely. And then you'll find that little by little you're free of this dreadful world of fear out there. And you don't even have to think of changing that world of fear. The minute you think of changing it, you're caught in it. The only thing you can ever do is to practice the world of the heart and just trust that the heart will take care of that. And that sounds very la-di-da and spiritual, and it certainly is. That's the only true spiritual activity is through the heart. And but the one thing that you can't do is use that to try to artificially change culture out here, because it doesn't work.
Now, you spoke about fear. You've mentioned fear a number of times during our discussion, and really that's what underlies all this, and it's actually fear of death. And you speak eloquently in the book about, there's a quote in there that our concept of death is the tragedy, not the event itself, and this fear of our own deaths is set against a background of a belief in a fundamentally hostile universe, and that all feeds into this overarching pattern of fear.
Of course, I have to agree that the fear of death is the one thing that underlies all the rest, and that also, if one is in complete rapport with the heart, that fear just simply leaves you. It's not there anymore. I'm 88, going on 89 years of age, and I must say the notion of the fear of death, what I've found that happens when you're really in touch with your heart, you will experience other states, and enough times that you know that when the body's worn out, you've got somewhere to go. And this is not a joke. It's not a religious thing. You're not going to get it out of the Bible or anything else like that, but your own personal experience of getting in touch with your heart and learning just simply to listen to it. Again, I think that's one of the, they changed the title of that newest book of mine, The Heart-Mind Matrix, but that the heart-mind is the whole trick of it, that we're all locked into our mind and have lost touch with our heart. But boy, when you open up to the heart, most of the fear just leaves. It really does, because you discovered this other aspect of your life.
Well, there are theories out there that time, the ages of man, are cyclical, not linear, and that golden ages come and go and dark ages come and go. And I'm just wondering, in your lifetime, particularly since you've been writing, what you think, how you feel the direction of travel is, because you talk about we can't change this on a mass scale, and a lot of people who are trying to change things are trying to do that on a large scale. You talked about we have to do it individually. What do you think our direction of travel is? Have you seen things to encourage you in your lifetime in terms of where we're going?
I think the living earth itself is our key there. I think of the studies of Whittleston and Pearce in 1925. They set up a Pioneer Health Clinic in London. They were two both cellular biologists, medical doctors, and so on. And so they started this magnificent work. On a large scale. They were well funded. And by the 1932, I think it was, they had published fully, and with an enormous amount of research behind it, the fact that the Earth is a living sphere. The Earth is the sphere, and all the things that we experience are this living sphere of the Earth. And when we start tearing it apart at the rate we have, then it's getting out of balance, and all sorts of things are beginning to happen. And it makes the notion of global warming utterly ridiculous, because you'll find that what's really going on is the living body of the Earth is simply trying to move to correct errors within it. And if you want to really read an interesting, read the book by Williamson and Pearce, published in 1954, called Science Synthesis, meaning the way you put things together, and Science Synthesis and Sanity. Now, they're using the term science in its original term, which simply means a knowledge of. Synthesis is how you're going to put your various experiences together, and they use the term sanity for wholeness or completeness. It was at that stage not used for being crazy. And so if you read them from 1932 on, they wrote about this. And in 54, they published that one great work. It's not an easy thing to read at all, but I've been recommending it to loads of people. Science, Synthesis, and Sanity by Williamson and Pearce. It's a husband-wife medical team. And the other thing is, just recently we've had this magnificent work called Robert Wolf's work on original wisdom. And what Robert Wolf, this Dutch psychologist, found in the Malaysian jungle that absolutely changed his life forever, and would change anyone who catches on to it and reads it. You just simply begin to be freed from the great fear that our intellect has created around us, and you begin to discover this great freedom of the heart. And it sounds like so much BS, but boy, I'm simply myself very, very thankful for it.
Excellent. Well, Joe, today we've been talking about some of the ideas in your book, Exploring the Crack in the Cosmic Egg, and just to remind listeners that that's just been republished, so that's widely available. And just in conclusion, is there anything else you'd like to share with folks?
No, I was awfully pleased with the book. They turned out a pretty edition. Now, certainly much prettier than the old one, and a good solid book. That's ITI again, Inner Traditions, that published it, but they really did a good job on that, and I liked the fact that they had a long-standing friend and kind of hero of mine, Tom Hartman, who did an introduction for it. I was really flattered with that, because I've always admired Tom a great deal and known him for many, many years. I hope they sell a lot of copies of it.
Well, listen, Joe, thank you so much for spending time with us today on legalizefreedom.com.
Thank you for having me. I'm very pleased, and I enjoy speaking with you.
Well, folks, that's it for another week. As ever, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please check out the website. That's legalizefreedom.com, legalize-freedom.com, where you'll find an archive of programs offering alternative views on a wide range of topics, including world affairs, politics and economics, science and technology, religion and spirituality, conspiracy, and alternative history. You can also browse and buy a range of books and DVDs from our guests, and if you're feeling generous, make a donation to help keep the site up and running. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to legalizefreedom.com.
You have asked, are we happy? Are we happy and effective? Consultation with leading experts in the field makes it perfectly clear that we are all now programmed for perfect happiness, perfect happiness, perfect happiness, perfect happiness. There are, of course, occasional technical or electronic errors in programming and/or surveillance which produce perverse exceptions. First, they start skipping prescribed drug dosages. Then they begin touching, then indulging in various sexual acts, and the ultimate perversion, love. For such extreme psychobiological misfunction, only isolation will do.
You know how a game serves us. Nations are bankrupt, gone. None of that tribal warfare anymore. Even the corporate wars are a thing of the past. So now we have the majors and their executives. Transport, food, communication, housing, luxury, energy. A few of us making decisions on a global basis. Now everyone has all the comforts, you know that. No poverty, no sickness, no needs, and many luxuries which you enjoy just as if you were in the executive class. Corporate society takes care of everything. And all it asks of anyone, or has ever asked of anyone ever, is not to interfere with management decisions.
You still don't get it, do you, boys? There ain't no countries anymore. No more good guys. They're running the whole show. They own everything, the whole goddamn planet. They can do whatever they want. What's wrong with having it good for a change? And they're going to let us have it good if we just help them. They're going to leave us alone. Let us make some money. You can have a little taste of that good life, too. Now, I know you want it. Hell, everybody does. What's the threat? We all sell out every day. Might as well be on the winning team.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about? Matrix. Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.